Set in 1876 in the frontier town of Cedar Ridge, Montana Territory, this story follows Emma Morrison, a 19-year-old schoolteacher who refuses an arranged marriage to the wealthy but cruel ranch owner, Silas Harwick. When the town council, influenced by Harwick's power and money, decides to publicly punish Emma for her disobedience, she faces public humiliation and physical punishment. During this brutal scene, Joseph Standing Bear, a Lakota warrior who works as a translator between the reservation and the town, risks everything to intervene. This act of courage sets in motion a chain of events that will challenge the prejudices of both communities and test the strength of human dignity in the face of injustice. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Cedar Ridge, Montana Territory, as Emma Morrison adjusted the worn leather satchel on her shoulder. The October air carried the crisp promise of winter, and she pulled her thin woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders. At 19, Emma had been teaching at the one-room schoolhouse for 2 years, ever since her parents died in a typhoid outbreak that had swept through the territory. Her modest salary barely covered her rent for the small room above Patterson's general store, but it was honest work, and she took pride in educating the children of this frontier community. The bell tower of the Methodist Church chimed 8 times, signaling the start of another school day. Emma quickened her pace, her worn boots clicking against the wooden planks of the boardwalk. She nodded politely to Mrs. Henderson, who was hanging laundry behind the boarding house, and waved to young Timothy Sullivan, who was helping his father load supplies onto their wagon. As she approached the schoolhouse, a simple wooden structure with a bell tower and 2 windows on each side, Emma noticed a figure waiting by the front steps. Her stomach tightened as she recognized the imposing silhouette of Silas Harwick, the wealthiest rancher in the territory. At 42, Harwick owned nearly 10,000 acres of grazing land and employed over 30 men. His political influence extended far beyond his ranch, and most of the town council members owed him favors or money. "Miss Morrison," Harwick said, removing his black hat to reveal thinning gray hair. His pale blue eyes studied her with the same calculating look he used when evaluating livestock. "I trust you received my message yesterday." Emma's hands trembled slightly as she fumbled with her keys. "Yes, Mr. Harwick, I received it." "And your answer?" She turned to face him, drawing strength from the familiar sight of the schoolhouse behind her. "My answer remains the same. I cannot accept your proposal." Harwick's jaw tightened, the muscles working beneath his weathered skin. He had built his fortune through determination and ruthlessness, qualities that had served him well in the harsh frontier environment. The idea that a penniless schoolteacher would dare refuse him was not just surprising, it was insulting. "Miss Morrison, I think you fail to understand the generosity of my offer. I am prepared to make you my wife, to provide for you in a manner far exceeding your current circumstances. You would want for nothing." Emma's green eyes met his steadily. "I am grateful for your offer, Mr. Harwick, but I cannot marry someone I do not love. Marriage should be based on mutual affection and respect, not convenience." The rancher's face darkened. "Love." He spat the word as if it tasted bitter. "This is the frontier, Miss Morrison, not some romantic novel. Survival depends on practical arrangements. You are an unmarried woman with no family, no prospects, and no protection. I am offering you security. I have my teaching position. I can support myself." "Your teaching position?" Harwick laughed harshly. "The school board meets at my discretion, and I contribute more to the teacher's salary than any other member of this community. Your position exists at my pleasure." Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Harwick? I am stating facts. You have until Sunday to reconsider. That gives you 3 days to think about your future and your options." Before Emma could respond, the sound of children's voices filled the air as her students began arriving for the morning session. 7-year-old Sarah Mitchell ran up to her, pigtails bouncing, clutching a handful of wildflowers. "Miss Morrison, I picked these for you." Sarah's innocent smile faltered as she noticed the tension between the adults. Emma knelt down to accept the flowers, forcing a smile. "Thank you, Sarah. They're beautiful. Why don't you go inside and help me prepare for today's lessons?" As Sarah disappeared into the schoolhouse, other children began arriving. The Patterson twins, young Michael O'Brien, and the Johnsons' 3 youngest. Emma greeted each one warmly, using their familiar presence to steady her nerves. Harwick watched this interaction with cold calculation. "You're good with children, Miss Morrison. It's a quality I value. My late wife left me with 2 young ones who need a mother's guidance. Your children deserve someone who will love them, not someone who is forced into their lives." They deserve stability and proper upbringing. Love is a luxury we cannot afford out here." Emma straightened to her full height, which brought her eyes level with Harwick's chin. "I disagree, Mr. Harwick. Love is what makes us human. Without it, we are no better than animals fighting for survival." The rancher's expression grew dangerous. "You have been teaching these children for 2 years, Miss Morrison. Have you considered what would happen to their education if you were to lose your position? The nearest school is in Helena, nearly 200 miles away." The threat was clear. Emma's refusal wouldn't just affect her, it would impact every child in Cedar Ridge. She looked through the schoolhouse window at her students, who were chattering excitedly as they prepared for the day's lessons. These children had become her world, and the thought of abandoning them was almost unbearable. "I see you understand the situation," Harwick continued, noting her distress. "I am not an unreasonable man. I am offering you a comfortable life, social position, and the opportunity to continue influencing young minds as the wife of a prominent citizen. Many women would consider themselves fortunate to receive such an offer." Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. "And if I continue to refuse, then you will discover that defying the will of this community has consequences. The town council takes a dim view of unmarried women who refuse suitable matches. They might decide that your independence sets a poor example for the children." The sound of the school bell interrupted their conversation. Emma had to ring it to signal the start of classes, but her hands were shaking too badly to pull the rope properly. On the third attempt, the bell's clear tone rang out across the town. 3 days, Miss Morrison. I suggest you use them wisely." Harwick mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Emma standing alone on the schoolhouse steps. She watched him disappear around the corner before taking a deep breath and entering the classroom. The familiar sight of her students seated at their wooden desks provided some comfort. The schoolhouse was simple but well maintained, with a large blackboard at the front, maps of the United States and Montana Territory on the walls, and shelves lined with the precious few books she had managed to acquire. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the eager faces of children ranging in age from 6 to 14. "Good morning, class," Emma said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Good morning, Miss Morrison," the children chorused in response. As she began the day's lessons, Emma tried to focus on arithmetic and reading, but her mind kept returning to Harwick's ultimatum. She had come to Cedar Ridge full of hope and determination, believing that education could make a difference in these children's lives. The thought of being forced into a loveless marriage, or worse, being driven from town and leaving her students without a teacher, filled her with despair. During the lunch break, as the children played outside, Emma sat at her desk and stared at the letter she had received the previous day. Written in Harwick's precise handwriting, it was formally worded but unmistakably clear. He expected her to become his wife, and he would not accept refusal. Through the window, she could see the children playing games in the dusty yard behind the schoolhouse. Their laughter provided a stark contrast to the darkness of her thoughts. These children trusted her, looked up to her, and depended on her for their education. How could she abandon them? But how could she sacrifice her own happiness and dignity to a man who viewed her as nothing more than a useful acquisition? The afternoon passed slowly, and as the final bell rang, Emma watched her students file out of the schoolhouse. Sarah Mitchell lingered behind, approaching Emma's desk with a worried expression. "Miss Morrison, are you sad? You looked unhappy today." Emma knelt down to Sarah's level, touched by the child's concern. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Sometimes adults have difficult decisions to make. My mama says that when she has difficult decisions, she prays about them. Maybe you should try that." Emma smiled genuinely for the first time that day. "That's very good advice, Sarah. You're a wise little girl." After Sarah left, Emma remained in the empty schoolhouse, surrounded by the echoes of children's voices and the weight of her impossible situation. The setting sun cast long shadows across the classroom, and she realized that in 3 days, everything she had worked for might be lost. Outside, the town of Cedar Ridge continued its daily routine, unaware that one young woman's refusal to submit to an unwanted marriage would soon challenge everything they believed about power, justice, and human dignity. The confrontation that awaited would test not only Emma's courage, but also the character of everyone who witnessed it. As darkness began to fall, Emma finally gathered her belongings and locked the schoolhouse door. She had no idea that her decision to stand firm against Silas Harwick would attract the attention of someone who understood better than most what it meant to fight for dignity in the face of overwhelming odds. The following morning brought an unseasonable chill to Cedar Ridge, with grey clouds gathering on the horizon like an omen of the storm brewing within the community. Emma had spent a restless night in her small room above Patterson's general store, the floorboards creaking beneath her feet as she paced, wrestling with the impossible choice before her. The sound of heavy boots on the wooden stairs outside her door at dawn told her that her time for private contemplation was over. 3 sharp knocks echoed through the thin walls. "Miss Morrison, it's Sheriff Bradley. I need to speak with you." Emma's heart sank as she opened the door to find the weathered lawman standing in the narrow hallway, his hat in his hands and his expression grave. Sheriff Tom Bradley was a fair man in his 50s, with kind eyes and graying hair, but she could see the discomfort in his posture. "Sheriff Bradley, is something wrong?" "I'm afraid so, Miss Morrison. The town council has called an emergency meeting for this afternoon. They've asked me to inform you that your presence is required." Emma's hands trembled as she gripped the doorframe. "Required? On what grounds?" The sheriff's weathered face creased with worry. "They're claiming you violated the moral standards expected of a schoolteacher. Mr. Harwick has made certain allegations about your conduct." "What allegations?" Emma's voice rose in disbelief. "I have done nothing wrong. I know that, Miss Morrison. Most folks in this town know that. But Harwick has influence, and he's been talking to the council members since yesterday evening. He's convinced them that your defiance sets a dangerous example for the children and the other women in town." Emma felt the world tilting around her. Defiance? For refusing a marriage proposal? Sheriff Bradley stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Between you and me, Miss Morrison, this isn't about morality, this is about power. Harwick doesn't like being told no, especially not by someone he considers beneath his station. He's using the council to pressure you into compliance. And you're going to allow this?" The sheriff's jaw tightened. "I took an oath to uphold the law, Miss Morrison. Unfortunately, the town council has the legal authority to oversee the school and its teacher. I can't stop them from holding a meeting, but I can make sure it's conducted fairly." Emma closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the situation crushing down on her. What exactly are they planning to do? They're calling it a moral review. They want to examine your conduct and determine if you're fit to continue teaching. Harwick has suggested that public censure might be appropriate. Public censure. Emma's voice barely escaped her throat. "A formal punishment, carried out in front of the community. It's an old practice meant to shame someone into compliance. Miss Morrison, I've seen what happens when powerful men feel their authority challenged. If you don't find a way to resolve this..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Emma understood perfectly. She had 3 hours until the council meeting, and her life was about to change forever. News of the emergency council meeting spread through Cedar Ridge like wildfire. By noon, clusters of people gathered on street corners, their voices hushed as they discussed the unprecedented situation. Never before had a schoolteacher been brought before the council for refusing a marriage proposal. The implications were staggering. At Patterson's general store, Emma overheard Mrs. Patterson speaking with Mrs. Henderson in urgent whispers. "It's not right, Margaret. That girl has done nothing but good for this town. She's taught our children with patience and kindness. But you know how things work here, Helen. Harwick owns half the businesses and employs a quarter of the men. People are afraid to cross him. Still, there must be someone willing to speak up for her." Emma ducked behind a display of canned goods, not wanting to embarrass the women by revealing she'd overheard their conversation. But their words gave her a glimmer of hope. Perhaps not everyone in Cedar Ridge was willing to let Harwick manipulate the situation. At 1 o'clock, Emma made her way to the town hall, a simple wooden building that served as the center of civic life. A crowd had already gathered outside, and she could feel their eyes following her as she climbed the front steps. Some faces showed sympathy, others curiosity, and a few displayed the cold judgment she had come to expect from Harwick's supporters. Inside the hall, 5 men sat behind a long table at the front of the room. Mayor Jonathan Whitmore, a nervous man in his 40s who owned the town's only hotel. Doc Peterson, the community physician. Reverend Matthews from the Methodist Church. Samuel Patterson, the store owner, and Silas Harwick himself sitting at the right end of the table like a king holding court. Emma took her seat in the front row, acutely aware of the dozens of people filing in behind her. She recognized many faces from the community, parents of her students, business owners, ranch hands, and families who had lived in Cedar Ridge for years. The weight of their attention was almost overwhelming. Mayor Whitmore called the meeting to order, his voice shaking slightly. "We are here today to address concerns about the conduct of Miss Emma Morrison, our current schoolteacher. Mr. Harwick has brought certain matters to our attention that require immediate review." Emma stood, her voice clear despite her fear. "Mayor Whitmore, I request to know the specific charges against me. I have a right to understand what I'm being accused of." Harwick leaned forward, his cold eyes fixed on her. "Miss Morrison, you have publicly defied the natural order of our community. When a respectable gentleman offers marriage to an unmarried woman, acceptance is not just expected, it is a moral obligation. Your refusal demonstrates a dangerous independence that threatens the stability of our society." A murmur ran through the crowd. Emma could hear some voices of support, but they were quickly hushed by others. "Furthermore," Harwick continued, "your behavior sends a message to the children under your care that defiance of authority is acceptable. As a teacher, you should be modeling proper submission to the will of the community." Reverend Matthews, a thin man with kind eyes, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Mr. Harwick, I'm not sure that refusing a marriage proposal constitutes immoral behavior. The scriptures speak of marriage as a sacred bond that should be entered into willingly. The scriptures also speak of obedience and proper submission," Harwick countered. "A woman who refuses a suitable match demonstrates pride and willfulness that have no place in a Christian community." Emma felt her anger rising. "Mr. Harwick, I have committed no crime. I have taught the children of this community faithfully for 2 years. I have lived quietly, attended church regularly, and conducted myself with proper dignity. My only crime is refusing to marry a man I do not love." "Love!" Harwick's voice boomed through the hall. "There is the root of the problem. You have filled your head with romantic notions that have no place in the practical world. A woman's duty is to accept the protection and provision of a worthy man, not to indulge in selfish desires." Doc Peterson, who had remained silent until now, cleared his throat. "Silas, I've known Emma for 2 years. She's been nothing but exemplary in her conduct. Surely we can find a way to resolve this matter without..." "Without what, Doctor?" Harwick's tone was dangerous. "Without upholding the moral standards that keep our community civilized. Miss Morrison's defiance is a cancer that will spread if left unchecked. Other women will begin to think they can refuse suitable matches. Children will learn that authority can be challenged, and the very fabric of our society will unravel." Emma realized that this was about far more than her personal situation. Harwick was using her as an example, a warning to anyone who might dare to challenge his authority in the future. The meeting was not about justice, it was about control. "I propose," Harwick continued, "that Miss Morrison be given one final opportunity to reconsider her position. If she accepts my proposal, this matter can be resolved quietly. If she continues in her defiance, the council must take action to preserve the moral integrity of our community." "What kind of action?" Sheriff Bradley's voice cut through the tension from the back of the room. Harwick's smile was cold. "Public censure, a formal punishment that will demonstrate the consequences of defying community standards. Miss Morrison will be brought to the town square and subjected to correction until she acknowledges her error." The hall erupted in shocked murmurs. Emma felt the blood drain from her face as she realized the full extent of Harwick's plan. Public censure in frontier communities often involved physical punishment, humiliation designed to break a person's spirit and force compliance. "That's barbaric," Dr. Peterson said, his voice filled with disgust. "We're not living in the Middle Ages. We're living on the frontier," Harwick replied coldly. "And frontier justice requires clear consequences for those who threaten the social order." Emma stood again, her voice steady despite her terror. "Members of the council, I have broken no law. I have violated no moral standard. I have simply exercised my right as a free woman to choose my own path in life. If you proceed with this punishment, you will be acting not as servants of justice, but as instruments of one man's wounded pride." Mayor Whitmore looked around the table at his fellow council members. The room was silent, except for the sound of shifting chairs and nervous breathing. Finally, he spoke. "The council will deliberate privately for 15 minutes. Miss Morrison, you may wait outside." As Emma walked toward the door, she could feel the eyes of the entire community upon her. Some faces showed sympathy, others fear, and a few displayed the cold satisfaction of those who enjoyed seeing others brought low. She stepped outside into the cool afternoon air, where a crowd had gathered to await the decision. Among the faces in the crowd, she noticed someone she hadn't seen before. A tall man with dark hair and copper-colored skin, wearing a mixture of traditional and frontier clothing. He stood apart from the others, his dark eyes fixed on the town hall with an expression of quiet intensity. There was something about his presence that seemed to command respect, even from those who might otherwise show hostility to a Native American in their midst. 15 minutes felt like an eternity. When the doors finally opened and Mayor Whitmore called her back inside, Emma's legs felt weak beneath her. She took her seat and waited for the verdict that would determine her fate. "Miss Morrison," the mayor began, his voice heavy with regret, "the council has reached a decision. By a vote of 3-2, we find that your conduct has been inconsistent with the moral standards expected of a schoolteacher in this community." Emma's heart sank as she realized that Harwick had won. The fix had been in from the beginning. "You are hereby given one final opportunity to reconsider your position regarding Mr. Harwick's proposal. If you accept his offer of marriage, this matter will be considered closed. If you continue to refuse, you will face public censure tomorrow at noon in the town square." Emma stood slowly, her mind reeling. Around her, the crowd stirred with excitement and horror. Tomorrow, in front of the entire community, she would be publicly humiliated and physically punished for the crime of refusing an unwanted marriage. "I need time to consider," she said quietly. "You have until tomorrow morning," Mayor Whitmore replied. "The council will reconvene at 10 o'clock for your final answer." As Emma walked out of the town hall, she felt as though she were walking to her execution. The crowd parted before her, some faces showing sympathy, others curiosity about how this unprecedented drama would conclude. She had 18 hours to decide between sacrificing her dignity through forced marriage or enduring public punishment that might destroy her completely. Behind her, she could hear Harwick's satisfied voice speaking to his supporters. He had orchestrated this entire spectacle to force her submission, and it appeared he had succeeded. But as Emma walked slowly toward her temporary home, she noticed the same tall, dark-haired man from earlier, watching her from across the street. There was something in his expression, a mixture of recognition and resolve, that made her feel for just a moment that she was not entirely alone in her struggle. The night passed with agonizing slowness for Emma Morrison. She lay in her narrow bed above Patterson's general store, listening to the sounds of the town settling into darkness. The distant laughter from the saloon, the clip-clop of horses on the main street, and the occasional bark of a dog, but sleep would not come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Harwick's cold smile and imagined the humiliation that awaited her in the town square. At dawn, she rose and dressed carefully in her best dress, a simple blue cotton garment that her mother had sewn for her 3 years ago. If she was going to face whatever came next, she would do so with dignity. She braided her auburn hair neatly and pinned it at the nape of her neck, then sat at her small table to write what might be her final letter. "Dear Aunt Margaret," she began, "if you are reading this, then the worst has happened. I want you to know that I regret nothing. I could not marry a man I did not love, and I could not allow myself to be bullied into submission by those who mistake power for righteousness. Please remember me as someone who tried to live with honor, even when honor came at a terrible price." She sealed the letter and left it on her table, then gathered her few precious possessions, her father's Bible, her mother's cameo brooch, and the small leather journal where she recorded her thoughts and lesson plans. Whatever happened today, she wanted these items to survive as proof that she had existed, that she had mattered. The town square was already bustling with activity when Emma emerged from the general store. Word of the impending spectacle had spread beyond Cedar Ridge, and people from surrounding ranches and settlements had come to witness the unprecedented event. Some had brought their children, treating it like a holiday outing. The thought made Emma's stomach turn. She walked slowly toward the town hall, where the council would reconvene at 10 o'clock for her final answer. The crowd parted before her, and she could feel their eyes assessing her, wondering if she would break at the last moment and accept Harwick's proposal. Their stares felt like physical weight pressing down on her shoulders. Near the church, she encountered Dr. Peterson, who was loading medical supplies into his buggy. He looked up as she approached, his weathered face creased with concern. "Miss Morrison," he said quietly, "I voted against the council's decision yesterday. What they're planning to do is wrong, and I want you to know that not everyone in this town supports it." "Thank you, Doctor. That means more to me than you know." He glanced around nervously, then leaned closer. "I've seen what public censure can do to a person, Miss Morrison. The physical wounds heal, but the humiliation, it can break someone's spirit permanently. If you're going to change your mind, now is the time." Emma's voice was steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I appreciate your concern, Doctor, but I cannot live with myself if I give in to this bullying. Some things are worth suffering for." Dr. Peterson nodded slowly, respect evident in his eyes. "I'll be there today, Miss Morrison. If When they proceed with the punishment, I'll do everything I can to minimize the damage." As Emma continued toward the town hall, she noticed the same tall, dark-haired man from yesterday standing near the blacksmith shop. He was watching the preparations in the square with intense interest, and she realized he was studying not just the physical setup, but the people involved. There was something about his posture and the way he carried himself that suggested he was no ordinary observer. The man was Joseph Standing Bear, though Emma did not yet know his name. At 28, he was a member of the Lakota people who had been forced onto the nearby reservation 5 years earlier. Unlike many of his people, who struggled to adapt to the confined life imposed by the government, Joseph had learned to navigate between two worlds. He spoke fluent English and often served as a translator during negotiations between the tribal council and territorial officials. Joseph had come to Cedar Ridge on routine business, delivering a message from the reservation agent to the territorial authorities. But the news of the schoolteacher's situation had reached even the reservation, and he found himself drawn to witness this display of frontier justice. He had seen enough injustice in his lifetime to recognize it in all its forms, regardless of the victim's race or background. What intrigued him most was the woman's apparent refusal to submit. In his experience, white society's treatment of its own women was often as harsh as its treatment of native peoples. Both groups were expected to accept their assigned roles without question, to submit to the authority of white men without resistance. This schoolteacher's defiance reminded him of the courage shown by the women of his own people during the difficult years of forced relocation. At exactly 10 o'clock, the town hall doors opened and Mayor Whitmore appeared, his face grave. "Miss Morrison, the council is ready to hear your final decision." Emma walked into the hall, which was packed with spectators. The 5 council members sat behind their table, with Harwick looking supremely confident. He had spent the morning receiving congratulations from his supporters, all of whom assumed that Emma would capitulate rather than face public punishment. "Miss Morrison," Mayor Whitmore began, "you have had the night to consider your situation. Are you prepared to accept Mr. Harwick's generous proposal of marriage?" Emma stood in the center of the room, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes upon her. She thought of her parents who had taught her to value truth and dignity above comfort. She thought of her students, who looked to her as an example of strength and integrity. She thought of all the women who might face similar situations in the future. "No," she said clearly, "I will not marry Mr. Harwick. I will not be forced into a union that violates my conscience and my heart. If this community chooses to punish me for exercising my right to choose my own path in life, then so be it. But I will not surrender my dignity to appease one man's wounded pride." The hall erupted in shocked murmurs. Some voices expressed admiration for her courage, others dismay at her stubbornness. Harwick's face darkened with rage, but he quickly composed himself, knowing that his victory was now assured. "Very well," Mayor Whitmore said sadly. "Miss Morrison, you are hereby sentenced to public censure. The punishment will be carried out at noon in the town square. Sheriff Bradley will escort you to the designated location." Emma felt her knees weaken, but she forced herself to remain standing. Around her, the crowd began to file out of the hall, eager to secure good viewing positions for the spectacle. She noticed that some people looked ashamed, while others seemed excited by the prospect of witnessing her humiliation. Sheriff Bradley approached her, his expression apologetic. "Miss Morrison, I'm sorry it's come to this. I'll do everything I can to ensure the punishment is carried out as humanely as possible." "I understand, Sheriff. You're just doing your job." As they walked toward the door, Emma caught sight of several of her students in the crowd. Sarah Mitchell was there with her mother, her young face confused and frightened. The Patterson twins stood with their parents, looking as though they were about to cry. Emma's heart broke knowing that these children would witness their teacher's degradation. The crowd had gathered in the town square, forming a large circle around a wooden post that had been erected in the center. The post was about 8 feet tall, with iron rings attached for securing the victim's hands. Emma had seen such arrangements before. They were used for punishing criminals and occasionally for the public discipline of those who violated social norms. Joseph Standing Bear positioned himself at the edge of the crowd, his dark eyes taking in every detail of the scene. He had witnessed many injustices in his lifetime, but there was something about this particular situation that stirred something deep within him. Perhaps it was the woman's obvious courage, or perhaps it was the recognition that oppression took many forms, affecting people of all races and backgrounds. At 5 minutes before noon, Sheriff Bradley led Emma to the center of the square. The crowd pressed closer, and she could see faces she recognized: shopkeepers, ranchers, farmers, and their families. Some looked sympathetic, others curious, and a few seemed to be enjoying the spectacle. Harwick stood on the steps of the town hall, where he had an excellent view of the proceedings. His expression was one of cold satisfaction. He had orchestrated this entire event to demonstrate his power and to send a message to anyone who might consider challenging his authority in the future. "Citizens of Cedar Ridge," Mayor Whitmore announced, his voice carrying across the square, "we are gathered here today to witness the lawful punishment of Miss Emma Morrison, who has been found guilty of conduct unbecoming a school teacher and a member of our community. Let this serve as a reminder that defiance of proper authority will not be tolerated." Emma was led to the post, where her hands were secured with rope. She stood facing the crowd, her head held high despite the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. The designated punishment was 10 lashes with a leather strap, enough to cause significant pain and humiliation without causing permanent injury. Deputy Marshal Johnson, a burly man in his 30s, stepped forward with the leather strap. He looked uncomfortable with his assigned task, but he had his orders. The crowd fell silent, sensing that the moment of truth had arrived. "Miss Morrison," the deputy said quietly, "I'm going to try to make this as quick as possible." Emma nodded, closing her eyes and bracing herself for the first blow. The crowd held its collective breath, and even the children seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. It was then that Joseph Standing Bear stepped forward. He moved through the crowd with quiet determination, his presence commanding attention despite his relatively modest stature. People turned to look at him, some with curiosity, others with suspicion. A Native American interfering with white justice was unprecedented and potentially dangerous. "Wait," Joseph said, his voice carrying clearly across the square. He spoke English with only a slight accent, his words carefully chosen. "I wish to speak." Deputy Johnson looked toward Mayor Whitmore, unsure how to respond. The mayor's face showed confusion and irritation at this unexpected interruption. "This is not your concern," Harwick called out from the town hall steps. "This is a matter for the white community to resolve." Joseph turned to face Harwick, his expression calm but determined. "Justice is everyone's concern. I have watched these proceedings, and I see not justice, but the abuse of power. This woman has committed no crime except refusing to surrender her freedom to a man she does not choose." The crowd began to murmur, sensing that the situation was about to become even more complicated. Emma opened her eyes and saw her unexpected defender for the first time clearly. There was something in his bearing that spoke of strength and dignity, qualities that reminded her of her own determination to stand firm against injustice. "You have no authority here," Mayor Whitmore said, his voice shaking with nervousness. "This is a legal proceeding conducted under territorial law." "And under territorial law," Joseph replied, "I have the right to witness public proceedings. I also have the right to speak against injustice when I see it." Harwick's face was red with anger. "Remove this man from the square. He has no business interfering with our justice." But Joseph Standing Bear stood his ground, his eyes fixed on Emma Morrison. In that moment, two people from different worlds recognized something in each other, a shared commitment to dignity and the courage to stand against oppression, regardless of the cost. The stage was set for a confrontation that would challenge everything the people of Cedar Ridge believed about justice, power, and the courage required to do what was right. The tension in the town square was palpable as Joseph Standing Bear faced down the assembled crowd and the town council. Emma Morrison, still bound to the wooden post, watched this unexpected intervention with a mixture of hope and terror. She knew that a Native American challenging white authority in 1876 Montana could face consequences far worse than her own punishment. "So I said, remove this man," Harwick commanded, his voice rising with fury. Several of his ranch hands began moving toward Joseph, their hands resting on their gun belts. The crowd stirred uneasily, sensing that the situation was spiraling beyond anyone's control. Sheriff Bradley stepped between the advancing men and Joseph, his weathered face tense. "Hold on now. Let's not turn this into something worse than it already is." He looked at Joseph with a mixture of respect and concern. "Mr. Standing Bear, I know you mean well, but this isn't your fight. You're putting yourself in grave danger." Emma's eyes widened with surprise. The sheriff knew this man by name, which meant he was known in the community. This wasn't some random stranger who had wandered into town. This was someone with a history here, someone whose intervention carried weight. Joseph nodded respectfully to the sheriff. "Sheriff Bradley, I understand the danger, but I have witnessed enough injustice in my lifetime to recognize it when I see it. This woman is being punished not for any crime, but for refusing to surrender her freedom. In my culture, we honor those who stand firm against oppression, regardless of their race or gender. Your culture, Harwick's voice dripped with contempt. Your culture was defeated, conquered, and placed on reservations where it belongs. You have no right to lecture civilized people about justice. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Emma saw Joseph's jaw tighten. But instead of responding with anger, he spoke with quiet dignity. My people were indeed conquered by superior numbers and weapons, Mr. Harwick, but we were not defeated in spirit, and we have not forgotten what honor means. When I see a person standing alone against those who would break their spirit, I cannot remain silent. Dr. Peterson pushed through the crowd, his medical bag in hand. Silas, this has gone far enough. Miss Morrison has already suffered enough humiliation. Perhaps we should reconsider the physical punishment. The sentence has been pronounced, Harwick replied coldly. The law will be upheld. What law? Joseph asked, his voice carrying across the square. Show me the territorial statute that requires a woman to marry against her will. Show me the legal code that makes refusal of a marriage proposal a punishable offense. Mayor Whitmore shifted uncomfortably. The town council has the authority to maintain moral standards. The town council has the authority to enforce legitimate laws, Joseph interrupted. But you cannot create new crimes simply to serve one man's wounded pride. I may be Native American, but I have studied your laws. I serve as a translator between my people and territorial officials. I know the difference between justice and revenge. Emma found her voice, speaking for the first time since being bound to the post. Please, she said, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet square. Don't put yourself at risk for my sake. I chose this path knowing the consequences. Joseph turned to look at her, and in his dark eyes she saw a depth of understanding that transcended their cultural differences. Miss Morrison, there are moments when a person must choose between safety and honor. You have already made that choice. Now I must make mine. He faced the crowd again, his voice growing stronger. I have lived on the reservation for 5 years, watching my people struggle to maintain their dignity in the face of overwhelming oppression. I have seen proud warriors reduced to begging for government rations, and I have watched children forbidden to speak their native language. But through it all, I have learned that the human spirit cannot be broken unless we allow it to be. The crowd was absolutely silent now, hanging on his every word. Even Harwick's supporters seemed uncertain about how to respond to this unexpected eloquence. This woman, Joseph continued, gesturing toward Emma, has shown the same courage that I have seen in the greatest warriors of my people. She has refused to surrender her spirit to those who would own it. If you proceed with this punishment, you are not upholding justice. You are demonstrating that might makes right, that power trumps honor, and that this community has no respect for the dignity of its own members. Deputy Johnson looked uncertainly at Mayor Whitmore, the leather strap still in his hands. The mayor glanced nervously at Harwick, clearly hoping for guidance on how to handle this unprecedented situation. Enough speeches, Harwick snarled. Johnson, carry out the sentence. If this Indian interferes, arrest him for obstruction of justice. But as Deputy Johnson raised the strap for the first blow, Joseph stepped directly between him and Emma. The deputy stopped, unsure whether to strike a man who was clearly not the intended target of the punishment. Move aside, Johnson said quietly. I don't want to hurt you. Then don't, Joseph replied simply. Lower the strap and walk away. Be a man of conscience rather than a tool of oppression. The standoff stretched for long seconds with the entire square holding its breath. Emma could feel Joseph's presence behind her, solid and protective, and for the first time since this ordeal began, she felt that she was not completely alone. This is intolerable, Harwick declared. Sheriff Bradley, arrest that man for interfering with legal proceedings. Sheriff Bradley looked around the square, taking in the faces of the crowd. He could see the uncertainty, the growing sense that this entire spectacle had gone too far. Many of the townspeople who had initially supported the council's decision were beginning to look uncomfortable with the reality of what they were witnessing. On what specific charge? The sheriff asked. He hasn't broken any law that I can see. He's interfering with the execution of a lawful sentence. Is it lawful? Dr. Peterson called out. I've been thinking about what Mr. Standing Bear said. Where exactly is the territorial statute that makes refusal of marriage a punishable offense? I don't recall seeing such a law in any legal code. Reverend Matthews, who had remained silent throughout the proceedings, suddenly stood up. As a man of God, I feel compelled to speak. The scriptures tell us that marriage should be entered into freely, with mutual consent. Forcing a woman into an unwanted union is contrary to Christian teaching. Emma felt a surge of hope as more voices began to join the discussion. The crowd was no longer simply watching a predetermined punishment. They were witnessing a community grappling with questions of justice and morality. The woman refused a suitable marriage proposal, Harwick insisted. In doing so, she demonstrated unfitness for her position as a moral guide to our children. "And what example are we setting for those same children?" asked Mrs. Patterson, Sarah Mitchell's mother. "Are we teaching them that might makes right? That those with power can force others to submit to their will?" Sarah Mitchell herself, standing with her mother near the front of the crowd, called out in her clear child's voice, "Miss Morrison is the kindest teacher we've ever had. She never hurt anybody." The innocent words of a 7-year-old seemed to cut through the adult rationalizations and political maneuvering. Emma felt tears forming in her eyes, touched by the loyalty of her young student. Joseph remained positioned between Emma and the deputy, his stance relaxed but unmovable. "Sheriff Bradley," he said, "I have a proposition. Allow me to speak privately with Miss Morrison for 5 minutes. If, after our conversation, she chooses to accept Mr. Harwick's proposal, I will step aside and allow the proceedings to continue. But if she maintains her refusal, I ask that this community consider whether it truly wants to be remembered as a place where people are punished for exercising their right to choose their own destiny." "This is ridiculous," Harwick protested. "We don't negotiate with Indians." "You're not negotiating with an Indian," Sheriff Bradley said slowly. "How you're being asked to show mercy by a man who understands something about injustice. I think his request is reasonable." Emma watched the sheriff with growing respect. She could see that he was using Joseph's intervention as an opportunity to de-escalate a situation that had spiraled far beyond what anyone had intended. Mayor Whitmore looked around uncertainly. The crowd was clearly divided now, with many people beginning to question the wisdom of the entire proceeding. The festive atmosphere that had marked the beginning of the day had given way to something much more serious and uncomfortable. 5 minutes, the mayor said finally, "but if she maintains her refusal, the sentence will be carried out." Joseph nodded and moved to Emma's side. As he began to untie her hands from the post, Deputy Johnson stepped forward. "I can't allow that. She's supposed to remain secured." "She's not going anywhere," Joseph said calmly. "Look around you. She's surrounded by hundreds of people. Where exactly would she run?" Sheriff Bradley nodded to the deputy. "Let him untie her hands. She deserves to speak freely." As the ropes fell away, Emma rubbed her wrists and turned to face Joseph fully for the first time. Up close, she could see the intelligence in his dark eyes, the strength in his bearing, and something else, a deep sadness that spoke of losses and struggles she could only imagine. "Miss Morrison," he said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone, "what I'm about to say may shock you, but please listen carefully. You have a choice to make, but it's not the choice they think you're making." Emma looked into his eyes, sensing that this moment would change everything. Around them, the crowd waited impatiently, unaware that the conversation taking place at the center of their circle would determine not just her fate, but the character of their entire community. The 5 minutes that would determine Emma Morrison's future and Joseph Standing Bear's destiny were about to begin. Joseph Standing Bear moved closer to Emma, his voice low and urgent, as the crowd waited impatiently for their private conversation to conclude. The autumn wind stirred the dust in the town square, and Emma could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes upon them, even as Joseph's words created a small bubble of privacy in the center of the chaos. "Miss Morrison," he began, his dark eyes intense with purpose, "there is something you must understand about your situation. Mr. Harwick's power in this community comes not just from his wealth, but from the debts and obligations he holds over others. Mayor Whitmore owes him money for his hotel's expansion. The Patterson family's store operates on credit that Harwick controls. Even some of the ranch hands who work for others are beholden to him for past favors." Emma listened intently, beginning to understand the depth of the corruption she faced. "You're saying this entire proceeding is orchestrated?" "More than that. I've been coming to this town for 5 years, serving as translator for my people's dealings with territorial officials. I've watched Harwick build his influence systematically. He doesn't just want you as a wife. He wants to demonstrate that no one in Cedar Ridge can refuse him anything." The 5-minute deadline was approaching, and Emma could see Harwick checking his pocket watch impatiently. Around them, the crowd was growing restless, with some people calling out for the conversation to end. "But you also have allies you don't know about," Joseph continued. "Dr. Peterson has been documenting irregularities in the town council's decisions for months. Sheriff Bradley has grown increasingly uncomfortable with Harwick's influence over local law enforcement, and there are others, people who are afraid to speak publicly but who believe this proceeding is wrong. Emma felt a flicker of hope. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that you have more power than you realize. If you stand firm, if you refuse to give in to this intimidation, you might break Harwick's hold over this community. But it will require courage not just from you, but from those who have been silent too long. And if I fail, if no one else finds the courage to stand with us, Joseph's expression grew serious, then we will both pay a heavy price. But Miss Morrison, some battles are worth fighting even when victory is uncertain. My people have learned that dignity preserved is more valuable than comfort gained through submission. As their conversation neared its end, Emma noticed movement at the edge of the crowd. Several people were whispering among themselves, and she could see uncertainty on faces that had earlier shown support for Harwick's position. Joseph's intervention had accomplished more than just buying her time. It had forced the community to confront the reality of what they were witnessing. "Time's up," Harwick called out, his voice cutting across the square. "Miss Morrison, what is your decision?" Emma stepped away from Joseph and faced the crowd. She could see her students scattered throughout the gathering, Sarah Mitchell with tears in her eyes, the Patterson twins looking frightened, and older students like Michael O'Brien watching with the intensity of young people, learning hard lessons about justice and power. "Citizens of Cedar Ridge," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the square, "I have listened to Mr. Standing Bear's words, and they have reminded me of something important. This is not just about my personal situation. This is about what kind of community we choose to be." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as people sensed that something significant was about to happen. "Mr. Harwick has offered me marriage, and the town council has threatened punishment if I refuse. But what they're really asking is whether I will surrender my fundamental right to choose my own path in life. They're asking whether I will allow fear to overcome principle." Harwick's face was darkening with anger, but Emma continued before he could interrupt. "I came to Cedar Ridge 2 years ago with nothing but a desire to teach children and contribute to this community. I have lived quietly, worked honestly, and tried to set a good example for the young people in my care. My only crime is refusing to marry a man I do not love." Dr. Peterson stepped forward from the crowd. "Miss Morrison is right. I've been silent too long about the irregularities in this town's governance. The council has no legal authority to punish someone for refusing a marriage proposal. This entire proceeding is a sham designed to serve one man's ego." Harwick whirled to face the doctor. "Peterson, you forget yourself. Your medical practice depends on the goodwill of this community." "My medical practice depends on helping people, not enabling tyrants," the doctor replied firmly. "I've documented numerous instances where you've used your influence to manipulate council decisions. This charade ends now." Sheriff Bradley moved closer to the center of the square, his hand resting on his gun belt. Dr. Peterson raises valid points. "I've been uncomfortable with this situation from the beginning. Miss Morrison, as the law enforcement officer in this community, I'm officially stating that no crime has been committed here. This punishment has no legal basis." The crowd erupted in surprised voices as the sheriff's declaration sent shockwaves through the gathering. Emma felt her heart racing as she realized that Joseph had been right. There were people willing to stand up to Harwick's intimidation, but Harwick was not finished. "Sheriff Bradley, you seem to forget who pays your salary. The town council controls law enforcement funding, and I control the town council." "Actually, you don't." The voice came from an unexpected source, Samuel Patterson, the store owner and council member who had voted against Emma yesterday. He stepped forward, looking nervous but determined. "Silas, I've been reviewing the territorial statutes and Dr. Peterson is correct. We have no legal authority for this punishment. If we proceed, we're opening ourselves to federal intervention." "Patterson, you coward." "I'm not a coward," the store owner interrupted. "I'm a businessman who recognizes when a situation has become legally untenable. Miss Morrison, I formally apologize for my vote yesterday. It was influenced by pressure rather than principle." Emma watched in amazement as the tide began to turn. Joseph had been right about the hidden opposition to Harwick's tyranny. People had been afraid to speak, but once a few brave souls broke the silence, others found their courage. Reverend Matthews rose from his position on the town hall steps. "As a man of faith, I must speak clearly. What we are witnessing here is not justice, but persecution. The scriptures call us to protect the innocent and stand against oppression. Miss Morrison, you have my support and the support of our church community. Mrs. Henderson, the boarding house owner, called out from the crowd, "Emma Morrison has been nothing but a blessing to this town. She's taught our children with patience and kindness. Shame on us for even considering this punishment." More voices began to join in, creating a groundswell of support that surprised even Emma. She realized that Joseph's intervention had done more than just protect her. It had given others permission to express their true feelings about Harwick's dominance over the community. But Harwick was not a man to surrender easily. His face red with rage, he gestured to his ranch hands, who began moving through the crowd with threatening postures. "This rebellion ends now," he declared. "I've invested too much in this community to see it destroyed by the romantic notions of a schoolteacher and the interference of a reservation Indian." "Mr. Harwick," Joseph's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "You speak of investment in this community, but what you've actually done is purchase control over frightened people. Real investment would mean helping this town grow and prosper. Instead, you've created a system where progress depends on your approval and dissent is punished. I don't take lectures from defeated peoples. My people were defeated militarily," Joseph replied calmly, "but we were never defeated in spirit. We learned the difference between strength and bullying, between leadership and tyranny. You have power, Mr. Harwick, but you have no honor." The confrontation was reaching a dangerous point, with Harwick's men positioning themselves aggressively and Sheriff Bradley clearly preparing for potential violence. Emma realized that her personal situation had sparked something much larger, a long overdue reckoning with the corrupt power structure that had controlled Cedar Ridge for years. "Stop!" Emma's voice rang out across the square, commanding attention from both sides of the growing conflict. "This has gone far enough. Mr. Harwick, you want an answer to your proposal? Here it is. No, I will not marry you. I will not be intimidated into submission, and I will not allow my situation to trigger violence in this community." She turned to address the entire crowd. "But this is about more than my personal choice. Mr. Standing Bear is right. This is about what kind of community we want to be. Do we want to be a place where might makes right, where one man's ego can override justice and decency? Or do we want to be a community where people are free to make their own choices, where courage is honored, and where power serves the common good rather than personal ambition?" Young Sarah Mitchell broke free from her mother's grasp and ran toward Emma, her small arms wrapping around the teacher's waist. "Don't let them hurt Miss Morrison," she cried. "She's the best teacher we've ever had." The sight of the 7-year-old defending her teacher seemed to galvanize the crowd. Other children began moving toward Emma, followed by their parents. Dr. Peterson, Sheriff Bradley, Reverend Matthews, and the Pattersons formed a protective circle around Emma and Joseph. Harwick found himself increasingly isolated, with only his paid employees still supporting his position. The community that had seemed so unified in its support of his authority was fracturing before his eyes. "This isn't over," he warned, his voice shaking with fury. "You think you've won something here today, but you don't understand the consequences of defying me. This town depends on my goodwill for its survival." "No, Mr. Harwick," Emma replied, her voice steady and strong. "This town depends on the courage and decency of its people. Today we've discovered that those qualities are stronger than any individual's power." As the sun reached its zenith, casting sharp shadows across the town square, the people of Cedar Ridge faced a choice that would define their community's future. The immediate crisis had passed, but the larger questions raised by Emma Morrison's refusal and Joseph Standing Bear's intervention remained to be answered. The final confrontation between old power and new courage was yet to come.